Hello, and welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel. Today we are going to be reading 4 true ghost stories from Haunted Canada. Now let's get into it. First one is called Ghost Train, and it's based out of Buchan's, Newfoundland and Labrador. In late 1927, the American Smelting and Refining Company finished work on a 35-kilometer railway line between Buchan's and Millertown in Newfoundland's interior. The company built the line to ship the zinc, lead, and copper ores dug out of the Lucky Strike mine in Buchan's. Soon after the line opened, the nearby Buchan's River Dam burst, and surging water washed out of the wooden train trestle across the river. Over the years, there were other accidents along the line, some of which claimed the lives of men who worked from the mining company. It's said that the spirit of those dead men might have been responsible for reported sightings of a ghost train in the area. A few years after the Buchan's line went into operation, people started talking about seeing a strange, distant light moving along the rails. Of course, it was much scarier for people who were on the train than for those who were standing off to the side of the tracks. That's because as the lights of the phantom train grew closer, it would appear as though another train was heading for a collision with the real one. At the very last second, just as the two trains seemed doomed to crash, the unidentified train would disappear. Every now and then, similar incidents were reported on other train lines in the province. There were also the occasional story about a ghostly conductor on a passenger train. Today, trains no longer operate in Newfoundland. The last one stopped running in 1989, and there haven't been any recent reports of ghost train sightings, but most of the tracks are still in place. What's to stop a phantom train from riding the rails through the Newfoundland backwoods even now? Might it happen again? Only time will tell. The Woman in Black, Jonesville, New Brunswick. On May 3rd, 2001, fire destroyed the Keenan Covered Bridge near Jonesville, New Brunswick. Local residents were sad to lose such a vital part of the area's history. The wooden bridge had been built across the Moncourt River in 1927 to replace the original covered span at the location. Many people were also saddened to think that something else had been lost to the flames. The ghost that haunted both bridges for more than 100 years. Stories about the ghost began circulating in the late 1800s when an older lady entered the bridge one day and was never seen again, at least not alive. After her disappearance, people started talking about seeing a strange woman wearing old-fashioned black clothes on the bridge. She never spoke to anyone, and she never stayed around when someone tried to approach her. But the woman in black didn't seem to mind being the one to do the approaching. Silently, mysteriously, and without any warning, she would suddenly appear in a wagon or sleigh, or in later years, even a car, sitting beside the person who was driving across the bridge. She would sit stiffly upright, staring forward with glazed, unseeing eyes. Worse still, sometimes she was headless. To find oneself riding with such an apparition could be an absolutely terrifying experience. One farmer was crossing the bridge to visit his sister when he suddenly realized the woman in black was sitting right beside him. On the wagon seat, he was frozen in fear. The reins hung limply in his hands, but his horse kept going. Then as the wagon turned into his sister's lane on the other side of the bridge, he fainted. When the man came to, the ghostly woman was gone, and the horse was panicking. He pulled on the reins to stop the frightened beast, leaped off the wagon, and rushed into his sister's house. When the man came to, the ghostly woman was gone, and the horse was panicking. He pulled on the reins to stop the frightened beast, leaped off the wagon, and rushed into his sister's house. But he was so stunned by what had happened that it took him a week to find the courage to talk about it. Several people had encountered the woman in black, or like the man. They didn't like talking about what they had seen. So when the Keenan Bridge was burned beyond repair, they must have been relieved. Surely the ghost was gone forever. But imagine what they thought when they saw a photograph of the burned-out bridge that was taken by a transportation department worker. There, on a piece of smoldering timber, was the haunted image of a woman's face. Shortly after the picture was taken, the face on the charred timber disappeared. A new bridge had been built across the Moncourt River near Jonesville. Only time will tell if the woman in black will visit too. The Traveling Corpse. Fort McPherson, Northwest Territories. In 1852, Roderick Ross McFarlane started working in the Northwest Territories as a clerk for the Hudson Bay Company. He did his job well and quickly worked his way through the ranks to become a factor or manager. It was during McFarlane's first years with the company that he got to know Augustus Richard Piers. Piers was a successful fur trader who was put in charge of Fort McPherson, an isolated post north of the Arctic Circle. When McFarlane got the news that Piers had died in March 1853, he was sad to hear it. He had liked Piers. He also remembered hearing Piers say that he never wanted to be buried at Fort McPherson, but that was exactly what had happened to the trader's remains. McFarlane often thought about what the dead men had said, but it wouldn't be nearly 7 years before he got a chance to honor Pierce's wishes. Late in 1859, he was at Fort McPherson on company business. Before leaving there, Fort Good Hope, where he was factor at the time, McFarlane decided to take Pierce's remains with him. It wasn't easy digging the coffin out of the frozen ground, but the men assigned to the task finally managed to do it. However, when they hauled the coffin up, they saw that the years had taken their toll. Quickly, they built a new, stronger casket. Then they opened the old one. Thanks to the chilly climate, Pierce's looked much the same as the day he had died. After getting over their shock at seeing how well preserved the body was, the men carefully moved it to the new coffin, nailed the box shut, and tied it to a sled. After weeks of guiding dog teams and loaded sleds across rugged ice and through blinding snow, McFarlane and his assistants finally reached Fort Good Hope early in 1860. But their journey wasn't over yet. All along, McFarlane had planned to rebury Pierce at Fort Simpson, which was still nearly 300 kilometers away. After he spent a few days accounting for furs they had picked up along the way, he got ready to hit the trail again. His men had nearly finished loading the sleds with supplies and trade goods for the next part of their journey when they realized there wasn't enough room for Pierce's coffin. They removed his body from the box, wrapped it in a blanket, and tied it to a sled. Then they were off again. McFarlane continued south along the Mackenzie River. The small group of travelers rested for a few days at Fort Norman, now Norman Wells, while McFarlane conducted some more business. Then they continued moving south. It was on March 15, 1860, the 17th anniversary of Pierce's death, that the men started to feel uncomfortable. They were setting up camp for the night close to the riverbank when the dogs started acting skittish. Then they began yelping and barking for no apparent reason. A little while later, the men started hearing voices, or more specifically, one voice. Time and time again, it called out for the darkness. "March," it said, "march." McFarlane and his crew searched the surrounding bush, but couldn't find the mysterious caller. They couldn't find what was continuing to upset the dogs either. The animals kept barking and pawing the ground nervously, ignoring all efforts to calm them. Then suddenly they stopped shifting around, curled up, and went to sleep. After calming their own nerves, the men finally fell asleep too. The men heard the ghostly command to march once more before their journey ended. Later, McFarlane would learn that Pierce had used the word to urge on his dog team. Was the phantom voice that of Pierce, urging the factor to keep moving until his remains were finally laid to rest? McFarlane thought so, especially after Pierce's ghost appeared to him when the group finally reached Fort Simpson. He was so terrified when he sensed the apparition's presence in his room that he hid under the covers in bed until it left. McFarlane arranged for Pierce's remains to be buried in the Hudson Bay Company Cemetery at Fort Simpson. He stood by the grave as the body was lowered into the ground on March 23, 1860. But for years afterwards, he wondered if he had done the right thing. Were the ghostly cries a sign that Pierce's spirit was eager to arrive at Fort Simpson? Or were they cries of complaint because the spirit was upset at having his grave disturbed in the first place? Whatever it was, McFarlane was relieved when the ghost was still once more. Ghost Child, Montreal, Quebec. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of the fictional super sleuth Sherlock Holmes, was very interested in ghosts and in communicating with the spirits of the dead. He often traveled to different cities in North America, giving lectures about the subject. In 1922, he visited Montreal as part of a Canadian lecture tour. There he read a newspaper article about a local company coping with the presence of a poltergeist. Conan Doyle visited the couple, and what he learned about the haunting made such a strong impression on him that he wrote about it when he returned to England. The middle-aged couple lived alone in their home, so when strange things started happening, they either had to blame each other, accept the fact that some unearthly force was at work. The man was slower to accept that fact than the woman was, not because he thought she was playing tricks on him, but because he didn't believe in ghosts. So when the lights went out time and again, suddenly plunging the house into darkness, he tried to convince her the wiring was faulty. When she was upset to find all the pictures in the house had been taken off the walls, he was curious, but not too worried about it that had happened. But when some invisible hand walloped him with a pillow on 2 separate occasions, his wife's belief that there was a ghost in their home no longer seemed so silly. Conan Doyle recorded some other eerie incidences that plagued the couple. The woman had kept wooden blocks that their child had played with many years earlier. Several times, either when they got up in the morning or returned to the house together, the couple would be greeted with impressive block towers and buildings. Time after time, they would dismantle the structures and pack the blocks back in the closet, only to find them hauled out and stacked back up, as if a youngster had been having great fun playing with them. Further evidence that the ghost might have been a child was babyish writing on bits of paper that mysteriously appeared in every room. However, other pieces of paper covered with clearer lettering and detailed drawings started showing up too, leading the owners and Conan Doyle to believe that 2 ghosts, a child and an adult, might be active in the house. Just thinking about such a possibility made the woman more nervous than ever. The man arranged for a priest to visit and say prayers to drive out any unnatural force that might be present in the house, but the haunting activity continued, and the couple finally decided that they had no choice but to move. Fortunately for them, as Conan Doyle noted, the ghost didn't move with them, and after months of stress and fear, they finally found peace in a new home. Thank you for listening. If you like this type of content, please consider subscribing and liking my channel, and I will see you on the next one.